So we're going to talk about the lens and what are some things that you might need to know about lenses, especially if you're going out and looking at different lenses. So let's look at an example here. So on the left we have what's called a prime lens. That means a fixed focal length lens. This example is a 50 millimeter lens. It is a normal lens on a full frame sensor camera. On the right we have a zoom lens. So it has a range. It can go from 18 millimeters to 55 millimeters. So you have a little bit more choices or options here, and it is showing you that it will work well on a crop sensor camera. These focal lengths are kind of designed for a crop sensor camera. So lens types. So we have telephotos. Those are big, tall lenses. They're great for seeing distant objects. So maybe if you're on the Serengeti and you don't want to be in the lion's face, a telephoto lens can be helpful. Standard lenses, limited or no distortion. That means that they won't alter the way that a subject looks. They won't make them look more round and bigger or thin and sort of basically compacted. Wide angle lenses will be great for small spaces. I used to do cave photography quite a bit, and wide angle lenses were crucial because a lot of times you're in tight quarters when you're photographing things. So think about putting your fingers on both sides of your head, and where you can start to see the fingers, that is your peripheral vision. And so like wide angle lenses kind of try to see that much of the range. We'll have a better example coming up. Close up or macro lenses, they're good for tiny things. If you want to photograph uh, Lincoln's head on a penny, you'd want a macro lens. So some things you might want to know that are on your typical lenses is they will say the focal range. So you can see that here. They'll tell you the ratio, and that ratio has a lot to do with the apertures a lot of times, and the lens ring size. So that is the actual size of the circle of the opening of the lens. That's good for knowing what size filter you'd want to put on the lens or a lens cap. So those are some things you might need to know about your lenses. So here is an older style lens. So on some cameras you can still put these older style lenses, and you can find the aperture control ring there on the bottom close to where it would mount to the camera. A depth of field scale that tells you what would be in focus and your actual focusing distance is the distance marker there. That's older style. You don't see it as much on newer. So then we have our a little bit of a different view of that, so you can kind of see it more close up. So our lenses are focal lengths here. This gives you kind of a good comparison. So in the blue, those are wide angle focal lengths on a full frame camera, so the 24 millimeter and the 35. So you can kind of see that looks more like peripheral vision to some degree. The 50 millimeter is our normal. The portrait is kind of usually thought of as around 85 to 105. You can kind of see there. And then your telephotos are really beyond that. So 200 millimeter lenses, 300 millimeter lenses, and so on. So here's a slightly different way of looking at that. And we've got our same camera on a tripod, and it is looking out in the same point of view in these different pictures. And if you look kind of close, you'll be able to see different things. So we're starting off with the 50 millimeter lens there on the left. And you can see from that point of view, you can see the couple down there on the railing, and you can see a ship in the distance. So if we go to 17 millimeters, we're seeing the area behind the couple. And at 28, we're seeing less of that area, but still some. Now, if we go on the other side of 50 and we go to the 135 millimeters, we're actually seeing that boat in the distance. And then if we go to 300, we're actually seeing very detailed stuff on that boat. And if we go to 500, we're actually seeing people standing on the bridge on that boat. And at 1000, you could probably make out that guy's face that's standing on that boat. So that gives you kind of an idea of how these different focal lengths can help you out. So here's kind of those same shots, and they're showing you kind of the field of view, if you will, and the degrees there. So some things to think about when you're picking focal lengths is a wide angle lens like a 28 millimeter lens. I can't talk. is going to give you this sort of bulging center compressed corners. So there's a distortion factor. You can kind of see that guy's nose looks quite big in that picture on the left, whereas that same picture with a 105 millimeter lens, you can see it's a lot more what we would probably expect if we were looking at it with our human eyes. So here's a different example of that. So here we got some interesting terminology. So long lens, moderate distance. So that is what we think of in terms of portrait and telephoto lenses when we say long lens. Short lenses, up close, that's when we think of wide angle lenses when you say short lens. So here's kind of just another view of that idea. And you can see starting at 350 millimeters in the top left, you can see this person's face. We're going all the way across to 100 millimeters on that right. And then if you go down to below to the 90 millimeters, you can see it's quite a bit different. You can actually see that the four corners of the image are getting dark, because at that focal length we're actually seeing inside of the tubing, or if the person had a lens hood on, we might be seeing the lens hood itself, and we're getting kind of those weird vignetted corners. So there's another thing about wide angle lenses and foreshortening that you should be aware of. That is, objects closer to the camera are going to appear bigger. So that hand is quite large compared to that head, because of the way it's coming towards the camera with the wide angle lens. And that's kind of an interesting phenomenon with optics.